Hi, video on Axline's study of Dibs. Remember, this is from the psychodynamic approach. Axline herself doesn't identify it as such, but other people do. So this is a case study looking at one particular case. Remember, Freud has various different methods of therapy, like dream analysis, like looking at ink blots. All of these things designed to access your unconscious. The difficulty, though, is that children might not have the level of skill in kind of language or in self-reflection to be able to do this. So Virginia Axline is looking at a different type of therapy with this child. So the main aim of this was to help Dibs, a kid who was locked in his own little world, fulfill his full potential. What was happening with Dibs is Axline was called to the school to kind of deal with him. Because he didn't have any friends, he constantly played alone. He used to kind of sit underneath tables and not interact in class. He didn't do any work. He was violent to children who tried to interact with him, and he became violent with adults when they tried to kind of take him away from school. So, for example, when his chauffeur came along. So Virginia Axline was asked to come in and kind of observe Dibs. So he was a 5-year-old boy. He lived with his younger sister and his parents. His dad was a scientist and his mother was a surgeon. She was a surgeon before he'd been born. Once he'd been born, she kind of left surgery, left the profession to be a full-time mother. They didn't really want kids, and they thought when Dibs was born that he had kind of brain damage or had a learning difficulty, things like that. And they thought that was the reason he behaved like he did. The school didn't exactly agree, though. So after Axline came in, she watched Dibs in the classroom for an hour, for a while, and then started conducting play therapy with him. At first, his parents were reluctant, thinking that it would be no use and Virginia Axline was wasting her time, but eventually they agreed. So every Thursday afternoon, he would go for 1 hour of play therapy. So the main part of Axline's study is just kind of summary of this case study of what happened during play therapy. So in play therapy, Dibs was free and able to do whatever he wanted. He could say what he wanted, he could play with what he wanted. Axline wouldn't kind of tell him anything to do. She wouldn't influence him. She wouldn't ask him any questions other than if he brought something up himself. She was trying to be as objective as possible and not interfere with him. So for example, one day he didn't want to play in the playroom and he said that he wanted to go into our office. So Axline took him to our office and she let him kind of play around in there, and she just sat and waited patiently for him and got on with some work. So Dibs was observed in the playroom therapy through a one-way mirror, so other researchers could make notes, they could record the sessions and things like that. So remember, there was also a problem at the school where the teachers weren't sure if you could read or not, and he would flick through books very quickly, but didn't really show much evidence that he was taking the words in. So playroom therapy, again, just basically is a big room full of lots of different toys and activities for the child to take part in. So in his playroom, there was a doll's house, a sandpit, soldier toys, paints, crayons, clay, things like that. These are an important list of things to remember to kind of help describe the procedure. So Axline soon discovered that Dibs was able to read and write, and they were actually well above average. At a test after this study, it turned out his IQ was actually 168. But he discovered in the very first session that Dibs was able to read kind of the labels on paint pots. So they recorded things like his speech. What he identified was that he never wanted to go home, and a thing that he said once was, "Oh, come away, Dibs, it's a very silly kind of paint, come away." This was an example of kind of how his dad treated him. So he also never wanted to go home. So Dibs would often talk about not being locked inside. His family used to lock him up in his bedroom when he had problems. When he was showing behaviour issues, they would lock him away in his bedroom. And Dibs demonstrated on the dollhouse that he very much didn't like this. One of the key points that we can make about the results of this is that he named one of the toy soldiers Popper and then repeatedly kind of punched it into the sand. He buried it in the sand and continued to kind of hit it. This was showing that he had problems with his dad and his relationship with him. So key points from the therapy session. He buried the doll in the sand, and the one that represented his papa. He never wanted to go home, and he hated doors and windows being locked, and he would demonstrate this kind of on the doll's house. So throughout this therapy and throughout Dibs talking to her, Axline realised that one of the big problems was that his mum was constantly testing him. She thought again that he was being born with learning difficulties, and she constantly tested him on spellings and mathematics and constantly pushed him and made him feel like he wasn't good enough. And his father did very much the same thing. So remember, in the case study, Axline didn't actually interpret anything herself. She just made notes of what was going on. Other people have came along and suggested that this fits into the psychodynamic approach, and that they had displaced his feelings for his father onto this toy soldier as an example of a defense mechanism. So another kind of way that they looked at it was suggesting that Dibs' behaviour had come from his id, ego and superego. So before the therapy, what was happening was his superego was so strong. His parents had constantly made him feel guilty and nervous and anxious and that he wasn't good enough. So his superego was so strong that his id never got any kind of freedom. It never got to give in to its desires. And that had caused him to lash out, being the only way he could kind of deal with that problem. Through the play therapy, his id was able to become strengthened and his ego was able to balance out the id and superego. So what happened was the play therapy let Dibs become a more normal child with a balanced psyche. Also, again, it links to the idea of defense mechanisms. By playing through family roles, by burying his dad, by operating the doors and the windows on the doll's house, he was able to work through his feelings about his life. Part of the solution came also when his parents realised what they had been doing. And what we saw was very quickly a rapidly increase or a rapid improvement in the relationship between him and his mum and him and his dad. Axline herself had met his dad and referred to him as being kind of very cold and distant. And through this therapy, both the mum and the dad started to improve their behaviours with him, stopped testing him so much, and started to kind of listen and show that they loved him a lot more. And Dibs' behaviour increased dramatically. Again, in conclusion, we link this to the psychodynamic parts of the id, ego and superego, and how the play therapy helped them balance out. And how by acting out all of these things in play therapy, it acted kind of as catharsis to release all of his problems. So that's the end of Dibs' study, and thanks.